If you've been watching My Life in Gaming, then you probably know that we've invested a lot into playing our retro games on authentic consoles in high-quality RGB video. So you might be surprised to learn that I actually own a RetroN 5, and I like it. It's not without its flaws, and it's had its share of controversy, but it generally works very well, and I don't hesitate to recommend it to retro fans who are interested in a far less expensive option for playing their collection in HD. But the RetroN 5 has one standout feature that I don't think enough people are talking about, and it's the sole reason that I bought the system despite my RGB setup. I call it my translation patch machine. That's right, if your RetroN 5 firmware is updated to at least version 2.0, you can play fan-made translations and hacks. Normally, if you wanted to play, let's say, Seiken Densetsu 3 in English, you'd have to download a ROM to use the fan translation on your PC or whatever. So for now, the RetroN 5 is the only system that lets you play an authentic, legally obtained physical copy of a cartridge-based game with a fan-made patch. This completely changed my perspective on the RetroN 5, not to mention significantly increased the number of import games that I was willing to play. ROMhacking.net is a good resource for discovering what games have fan translations and other hacks or modifications. But just because a game isn't listed here doesn't necessarily mean that a patch doesn't exist. ROMhacking.net also provides download links for patches. Most files that you'll find here are in IPS or UPS format, which are supported by the RetroN 5. Simply copy the file to the SD card, put the SD card back into your system, insert the game, go to the Game menu, and then to Game-Specific Settings, where you can choose a patch, which will then be loaded automatically every time you play that game. Now, sometimes a game might have a translation out there that you want to use, but you can't find the correct sort of file, or maybe it's just not working. Let's go visit our local RetroN 5 expert Drumble to learn how to get around these issues.
Unfortunately, there are times when the packs you want to use on your RetroN just won't work. A few different things can cause this, and usually it's not hard to fix. First off, if you're playing a Super Nintendo or a Super Famicom game, pay attention to the pack's expects header option. Depending on how the pack was made, it might expect an SMC header. This is a bit of a technical annoyance regarding how the PAX is applied to the ROM. You'll want to leave it off most of the time, but it's worth trying both ways if a PAX isn't working. Next up, make sure the PAX you're using was made for the same version of the game as the one you own. While relatively rare, some retro games had small changes made between print runs. If your PAX still isn't working, it might be time to just make your own. There are many different IPS utilities out there, but I like one called Lunar IPS. You'll also need a ROM of the cartridge that you own, and a ROM that's already been patched with the changes you want. Open up Lunar IPS and click Create IPS Patch. Select the original, unmodified ROM, then select the patched ROM. Hey, you're done! Maybe now that Try's seen how easy it is, he'll stop bugging me to make patches for him all the time.
So, if I understand all of this right, when you make your own patch using software like Lunar IPS, you're really just putting the ROM into a file that's recognized as a patch for a cartridge of your choosing, which, needless to say, could go far beyond translation patches. Some less shady applications of this might be to, say, turn Star Fox into the unreleased Star Fox 2, or to play the Satellaview Zelda game by using A Link to the Past. It's less like adding a patch to the game's actual data, and more like running any ROM in place of the cartridge you inserted. Which, well, obviously there's the potential to do a lot of things that you probably shouldn't, but that's not the purpose of what we're advocating here. See, the RetroN 5 can do all of this because, at the end of the day, it's really just an emulation box. It doesn't actually read the cartridge while you're playing the game. The entire ROM is dumped into the system memory when you insert it, but the cart is required to remain in the console as a sort of key to allow you to continue playing. Maybe this bothers you, maybe it doesn't. For me, I like the fact that I can own and use real copies of the import games that I want to play. I prefer to use original hardware and official cartridges whenever possible, but if I did have to make a concession on one over the other to get around a language barrier, I would choose the game over the console.
On the flip side to this, you may have heard me talk a bit about how I enjoy game reproductions in other episodes. That's because, for me, playing a cartridge on original hardware is way more important than using an official cart and dumping the ROM. This is especially relevant when playing a game where a translation has been officially released in other countries, but for some reason, it just never made its way to the US. Terranigma is my favorite example of this. I like to have some fun with it, and sometimes I go as far as to dress up my reproductions with custom-made boxes from people like Uncle Tusk to make it seem like a product that could actually exist. That way I can put them on the shelves next to my other games and they fit right in. This might seem silly, but check out my complete copy of Secret of Mana 2. It has a manual and everything. But one downside is that sometimes a translation patch will cause certain bugs in a game, and since, well, it's a permanent ROM burn, you have no recourse or way around it. For instance, in my Dragon Warrior 1 and 2 SNES repro, I ran into a game-breaking bug that made it impossible to get my final party member back after he fell into a coma. I had to start the whole game over. At least with a translation patch being applied to a ROM, there's a chance it could be fixed in the future.
So hey, whatever you prefer. Though it is worth noting that while repros work great in original hardware, they are not supported by the RetroN 5. Aside from translations, another reason you might want to consider imports is because, well, for games that we got here in North America, the general rule is that the Japanese versions are cheaper. Sometimes a lot cheaper. Especially for some of the games that are more sought after by collectors. Of course, a lot of these are very playable without a translation, but if you wanted to, you could simply apply a patch to play the official translation while using a Japanese cart. Or what about this? The localized version of Ninja Gaiden 3 is notorious for being incredibly mean and unforgiving, having limited continues and double damage over the Japanese release. Would you like to watch the cutscenes in English, but play by Japanese rules? Of course you would, and there's a patch for that. So yeah, there's technically a bit of unexpected flexibility for abusing the system, but the RetroN 5 also introduces a cool new way to use fan-made patches that, at least in my mind, feels more on the up and up than any other alternative that currently exists. And I'm definitely enjoying how this has vastly expanded my options for import gaming. Who knows, maybe one day there'll be devices that let us pass a real game cart through to the original console with a translation patch applied. But for now at least, for me, the RetroN 5 is the way to go.